Hello, welcome to Strategic Management, and in this presentation I'm going to be discussing how firms go about strategic development of growth. In particular, in this presentation I'll be discussing the direction of growth that firms might choose. Now, all firms will be faced by the need to grow at different times. This might be because the environment, the macro or the competitive industry environment is changing. Maybe there are opportunities that are presented which they can take advantage of, or maybe there are threats to their existing business, which means they've got to look for other areas of growth. It might be a realization that the firm has resources or competencies which can be utilized more efficiently, more effectively, and by doing so, then the firm can grow. Most typically, most firms will be put under pressure to grow every year by their principal stakeholders, particularly shareholders, who will want to see an increase in the dividend they receive from the profit that the firm makes every year. So they want to see the firm growing, particularly in terms of the level of profit that's being produced. So strategic growth can be considered in two parts. First of all, what direction can a firm look to find growth? And this is most typically discussed in terms of market or product opportunities. And ultimately, this comes to a discussion of the extent to which a firm might choose to diversify away from their existing activities. Secondly, once the direction that the firm is going to pursue has been established, then it's necessary to choose an appropriate method of development in which they can successfully pursue that direction. So the method is most typically addressing the need to have the appropriate resources and competencies available in order to enable the firm to follow the new direction. So when we're discussing growth, strategic development, then there are these two elements to consider: what direction to follow and what method to employ in order to pursue that chosen direction. We're going to be considering in this session the work of Igor Antsov, sometimes referred to as the father of strategic management, because he was amongst the first to bring an analytical, structured approach to planning the development of organizations. This is a picture of him aged about 53 back in the early 1970s. I think people tended to look a lot older in the 1970s than they do now. So Antsov gave us a matrix which outlines the strategic directions available to a firm that's pursuing growth. And there are two dimensions to this matrix: products or services and markets. And sometimes this matrix will be referred to as Antsov's product market matrix, or simply Antsov's matrix. So each of these variables are measured or captured in terms of existing products and services and existing markets, or new products and services or new markets. And with these two dimensions and the variability of existing to new, we end up with 4 areas of potential directions to pursue. The first one is referred to as market penetration, as a definite growth direction. Sometimes it might be referred to as consolidation, when growth isn't strictly the objective, but maybe it's an initial defensive move. The next possibility, looking for new products but still serving the existing market, is labeled product development. The third possibility, new markets in which to sell existing products and services. And finally, the ultimate and possibly the most risky of the 4 options, diversification. So looking for new markets in which to sell new products and services. The new, it should be noted, is new to the firm. Not necessarily completely new products or completely new markets in themselves, but product areas or market areas in which the business has no previous experience. There are also different ways in which we can consider growth and pursuing these different directions. It might be a single firm that's looking to add new products or to go into new markets, or it might be a large corporation or conglomerate which is looking to add firms which operate in different product areas to the existing firms they own, or operate in different markets to ones which they're familiar with, or of course looking for diversification away from their existing markets and products. Now in those conglomerates, what we may have then is the addition of independent new firms held within the portfolio. So there are two different perspectives on pursuing strategic directions. Typically, or traditionally, this matrix has been considered as these four boxes, four definite areas, four defined areas in which we can identify that a particular strategic direction is being followed. This does give rise to some difficulty in interpretation of, well, is a firm moving towards product development or is it moving towards market development? Because particularly in terms of those two directions, some product development will also entail moving into new markets, and some market development will require adaptation of products or development of slightly different products in order to suit the new market. So there is considerable overlap between the four different areas, and often we can really see that particularly product development or market development is really a form of diversification, and it's a question of degree of diversification, not is it or isn't it diversification, but to what extent is it product development, or to what extent is it really diversification. So in many ways, having these four distinct boxes isn't particularly useful, and I've gone right to the end. So it can be more useful to consider the matrix as an area, a whole chart area, and what we're looking at is trying to define or discern the extent to which diversification is taking place. So it's more a spectrum of possibilities rather than specific areas. So let's look at these different possibilities individually. The first is market penetration, and this is often seen as the most accessible direction to pursue. It means increasing your existing market share with the same products you've got, the same market you've got. So essentially doing more of the same that you've always been doing. So an example of that might be a retailer opening more stores in a particular area. The more stores they have in an area, the easier it is for customers to access those stores. So perhaps it's easier to start generating more sales and ultimately, of course, more profit, depending on the relationship between the cost of opening the stores and the increased revenue. So although you're doing more of the same, it does require a fair amount of investment. And of course, the level of that investment will vary from business to business. And it does also require increasing the organizational competency. How good is the organization at managing the business? So as the organization becomes bigger, it becomes more complex. And there is always the possibility that, as we can see in Porter's Five Forces under the threat of entry, that as a store opens more stores in newer areas, then the competition may retaliate. So market penetration on the surface is a fairly obvious strategy to follow, but it's not without risks, it's not without costs. And there may indeed be limits to which a firm is allowed to increase its market share. So for example, Tesco, although Tesco has all sorts of difficulties at the moment, for a long time The biggest difficulty it's had in the UK is that it cannot increase its market share in the UK above 30%, which it's been pushing against for many years. Still staying in that area of existing markets, existing products, is a different approach referred to as consolidation, or maybe on some occasions you might hear it referred to as retrenchment. In this case, what a firm is doing, it's withdrawing from areas of the market in which the competition is too stiff, or the market is declining, or there's not sufficient profit. So it's moving away from areas of weakness. An example, a very good current example of that, is that Marks and Spencers have just recently announced that they'll be closing many stores in the UK and also abroad, so they can focus on more profitable areas. So any store that's making a loss, they're going to close, and just that on its own will start to increase the profitability of the overall firm. But also, it will allow the release of resources. That might be people, it might be the time of management, and certainly it will be investment and cash flow. It will release those resources and enable them to be deployed in areas where they can actually see growth and profitability. Consolidation, of course, might be the first step in tidying up the firm, making sure the finances are in a good position, and then being in position to invest in some other growth direction. The next possibility is then that a firm can look at product development. So extend the product range with more features, different products or complementary products, but offering them to their existing customers. Apple and Dyson are both firms that have had quite extensive product development programs. And through developing the range of their products, for example, Dyson from vacuum cleaners to washing machines to hand dryers and to exceedingly expensive hair dryers, has been increasing its range of products. But you can also see that at the same time as they've been developing their products, they have been slightly moving towards different markets. That means coming into competition with different firms than they have been in the past. Product development can be very expensive. Thinking of the pharmaceutical market, then the average development cost for a new pharmaceutical is often quoted to be in the region of £500 million. So product development can require a great deal of investment. There may also be a question mark as to whether the firm has the right resources and competencies required to develop those products and to move into these different product areas. Have they actually got the right reputation in the marketplace for these sorts of products or services? And there is, on top of the expense of the investment, there is always the risk of delay in the product development program, which leads to a longer time to wait for return on the investment. And of course, there is also the possibility of product failure. And even firms like Apple have experienced quite extensive and expensive product failures with new products they've launched. The other option is market development. So this may be defined as going into new geographic areas or finding new users for existing products. Uber is a company that has been growing by extending their geographic reach. So moving into new countries, they've extended the size of their business. Humvee was a product that was developed specifically for military use, and then subsequently has been adapted in order to be sold into the public market in small segments. Not everybody wants a large, noisy, expensive Humvee, but some people do. One of the principal difficulties in developing new markets is understanding the new market that's being moved into. And this, of course, is particularly relevant to moving into new international markets, where understanding the culture, particularly the consumers, but also the distribution routes and of the competition, can give considerable problems to new entrants. And there's the cost of developing the new networks and the infrastructure. And understanding the new market and developing the networks and infrastructure can put a question mark over the level of profit that might eventually be achieved and the time it takes to achieve that profit. So you might think about the failure of Tesco in launching into California. They took 5 years to get to a point where they decided that they were going to withdraw from the market because they just could not compete in that marketplace. And that cost them £2 billion. So market development has risks, which are principally around the area of understanding the market, the competitors, and obviously the customers. The final or ultimate growth direction is diversification, which involves going beyond the existing product range and the existing market. Because of there are so many unknowns in this policy. Do you have the right skills and knowledge to develop the product? Do you have the right skills and knowledge to develop the new markets? This starts to bring a huge amount of risk. Normally, to be successful, then diversification needs to be part of a clear strategy. It shouldn't be an ad hoc, random moving around market and product areas, looking randomly for opportunities to pursue. There has to be some cohesive overall strategy so that key stakeholders can understand why firms might be deciding to diversify in different ways. I'll discuss diversification in more depth in a separate online presentation. So, the choice of direction that's going to be chosen might be based upon the cost of pursuing that direction, how much it's going to cost to invest. It will be based upon the current availability of resources and competencies, or the possibility of acquiring those resources and competencies, and acquiring them might be part of that cost. There will be a view taken on the level of risk. Wherever there's an investment, there's going to be some risk. How much return is going to be achieved, and when is that return going to be achieved, and what's the likelihood of meeting those forecasts? Some firms are happy to take more risk than others. So, looking at the overall return, not only the level of profitability against the investment that's been put down, but also the timing. How long does the firm have to wait, or how long do the shareholders have to wait until they see some return on that investment? Some businesses it might be 1, 2, 3 years. Other businesses might be looking at a much longer time before there's any actual return on investments. And the direction that's chosen must fit in with the overall strategic objectives of where that firm wants to be and how it wants to operate. Having chosen a particular direction to pursue, then the next stage is to choose an appropriate method by which that direction will be pursued. So there will be choices of pursuing an organic or internal method. It might be achieved by conducting mergers or acquisitions, or it might be achieved through having some joint ventures or alliances. So there are choices of direction, and subsequently there are choices of the method to employ. No single direction is always the most appropriate, and no single method is always the most appropriate. It is always a consideration of the capabilities of the firm, the wishes of the stakeholders, and a mix of the overall strategic objectives agreed within the organization. It's those dimensions that go into the pot when considering which direction shall we choose, and subsequently which method should we use. You can read more detail in chapter 6 of the core textbook, and in subsequent presentations I'll be discussing diversification in more detail and the 3 different methods which can be chosen to achieve the chosen strategic direction.